Hey there, welcome to the Perfectly Blended Podcast, Season 5, Episode 9. Today we're going to actually have an interview, which is super exciting. It's going to be Mike and Kristine Stensland, and that's coming up.
Run now.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Perfectly Blended Podcast. This podcast is for blended families, for couples that want to strengthen their marriage and want a brighter future. Perfectly Blended exists to break the stigma of divorce, drop the shame and guilt holding you back, and equip marriages to thrive instead of just survive. We believe all that is possible in this life is based on the power of Jesus Christ and His ability to restore us fully. Let's dive in. What's up, everybody? We are so excited for today's interview. It's actually been a while since we've had an interview on our show, and it's really awesome. So we had an opportunity to meet these guys last year, which we will talk a little bit about in our interview today because we don't want to kind of, get into it all just yet. So do you have anything you want to talk about before we dive into today, Mala?
Yeah, we met them I do want to say that we met them at that summit that we went to in Georgia because we did talk about that, and I got to go to my favorite aquarium ever while we were down there. And we were really blown away. Not thrown away.
we weren't thrown away.
Blown away about what they're into in the space for blended families.
Yeah.
We thought it was really, really cool. And we definitely wanted to be able to connect with them and have them on our podcast. And they graciously agreed.
Yeah.
And so we are very, 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 very thankful for that.
Yeah, it's really cool. So they are a married couple. And the cool thing is they help blended families, but they're even more uniquely, if you ever heard of Ron Deal, which we talk about him all the time on our podcast.
We do.
Ron Deal helps blended families too, but he's not from a blended family. So Mike and Kristine, they are part of a blended family, and they have a really cool story, which we'll dive into on today's interview. But, it's just really an exciting thing to be able to connect with other that are in the serving when it comes to blended families and about, all the different aspects and stuff. And so we really want to dive in a little bit today about their unique angle about how they help blended family. So
yeah, and they love Ron Deal too.
Yeah, don't we all though?
Yeah,
he's amazing. So without further ado, we want to introduce you to Mike and Kristine Stensland. Thank you guys so much for being with us.
You bet.
All right, so let's dive in. Let's just get right to it. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you guys are and why you're even on here today?
Why are we on here?
I blame,
we had nothing else to do.
blame you. That's what I'm saying.
I blame you. The extrovert.
Christine's the outgoing one of the two of
you
us.
Want to talk to us?
Sure. Let's go.
Well, I'll give the little bit of a backstory on who we are. We are Mike and Kristine Stensland. As you said, we live in Rochester, Minnesota, and we blended our family 16 years ago. Through Mike's sister was my MOPS leader. So those of you who know what MOPS is, Mothers of Preschoolers. She knew me when I was married. Then I went through my divorce, and she was funny. So I asked for her to be my leader again when I was divorced. And she came to me one day and said, God woke me up at 2:30 in the morning. You need to meet my brother. And here we are. He unfortunately at the time he was living in Indianapolis. Yep. So Rochester to Indianapolis is about 8.5, 9 hour drive.
Yep.
And she starts
depending on Chicago.
She starts telling me about this, her brother. And I'm like, he's got 2 kids and an ex-wife, and he's in a different time zone, Tammy. Like, that's geographically undesirable. But she was funny, and she said something funny. So I was going to throw her under the bus, and I gave her my email, and here we are. So now we're married 16 years later.
16 years later. Yeah.
I love it.
True. Yeah.
So you can give the kids his ages if you remember.
Well, if I can remember, I have to do math to get it. I just remember the birth years. That works out better because they keep getting older on me,
Yeah.
Anyway, my oldest daughter's 25 and my youngest daughter's 22. Oldest daughter's about to get married, and my youngest daughter is about to graduate from Purdue.
Oh.
Yeah. We have a big May coming up. And then my oldest son is 24 and my youngest son is 19. So we're empty nesters. And for those of you who are listening are in a blended family, the honeymoon comes at the end.
Indeed.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of power in that. I mean, it's true. It's funny because you guys said that earlier to us, and before we started, it's true because once you get blended, you're just doing the chunky dunk. You're right in it, and whether you like it or not, it's there is no time for husband and wife time. So
nope.
So we're living vicariously through you guys.
All right. It's a good gig.
It's a good gig. Yeah. So you hear that, everyone. Okay. It's a good gig, right? So hold on. The glory is in the end. So don't
That's
worry
right.
about it.
Hang in
Oh
it.
my gosh.
Right. So we know you guys are really connected in a lot of things going on right now. But before we jump really into that stuff, tell us a little bit about why you wanted to start serving blended families. Like, where did your desires come for that?
Mhm. Well, I'm going to go way back. So when I met Mike, it was very clear to us that we're very different. So Mike's an introvert and a researcher, and I'm an extrovert and was in business and I don't know, meet people easily, connect their brain, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the way we've handled that, by the way, is on Tuesdays and Thursday nights on my calendar, it says something, because I'm the introvert of the two of us. And it was just like the calendar was full all the time. When we first got married, she'd have 3 things scheduled for a night. And I'm like, I can't do that. So now Tuesday and Thursday nights, it says something on the calendar, and the something means nothing. You just can't fill that.
It's true.
Love that.
Yeah. So we kind of were like, why were we brought together? We have similar pain, but very, very different personalities, right? So why did God bring us together? Why did Mike's sister wake up and, why was I put in this path? And so we did feel like God was bringing us together to utilize our gifts to do something with that, make beauty from ashes, so to speak. And so first thing we did is at our church, we wanted to help people recover from divorce. And so we led divorce care at our church for 14 different sessions, which is a lot. So 7 years of 2 sessions a year at 13 weeks each. So it was a lot. And it was a heart heavy ministry. And we both had been through the divorces. So at one point we just said, okay, we also need support. Like, we want to be in community with people that are in blended families too. And so we started a blended family group at our church. I don't even know, 12 years ago,
something like that.
I don't know. It was in the middle of divorce care, so we were doing both.
We were doing both for a while. Yeah. And we were sitting there going, okay, we're hearing all these divorce stories. They're heavy every time. There's themes going on through here, like, oh, I've heard this story before, because it was just frequent and we could relate to, kind of the stories. We were like, well, what can we do to help keep people from getting to this mess? Because this is just, divorce is very sad and painful. And it's a very difficult thing to go through. It was far more difficult than I anticipated. That's a big loss. So
and the ripple effects continue.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, so then the blended family group stuff started too. And in the meantime, we got connected with Ron Deal and then the Family Life Summit on Step Family Ministry. So we started going to some of these national conferences. And at one of them, Mike and I both had similar experiences where we were just like, okay, again, well, why are we here? What is God trying to tell us? What are we doing? And we both heard local, and I heard local women, and Mike heard, I don't remember what it was, but it was more like we needed to bring down we needed to start at the beginning versus going, we're just going to change the world. And so I quit all other jobs and started working to form a nonprofit. It's called Guide Your Heart. It's really a connector organization trying to get people, elevate them to their highest and best levels in the areas that they're doing to support marriages. So Guide Your Heart doesn't just focus on blended families. It's a continuum of care, I would say, from youth education and what matters to starting out, preparing to get married, to enriching your marriage, to, conflict resolution, or people that are in crisis marriages, I guess, and then divorce recovery through blended families. So Guide Your Heart really is trying to serve those and connect those dots locally, but because the need for relationship and couple education is very high, but the demand is very low. So the nonprofit allows the organization to raise some funds to make it not financially prohibitive for people to get some of the services that they need.
Oh, gotcha.
So that's what I took out of that. And then Mike.
Yeah. And I think sometimes with Guide Your Heart too, we were looking at it going, it seems like sometimes couples wait too long and they don't know what to do until, it's pretty much one of them is ready to pull the ripcord. And then they're like, okay, let's go get therapy. And at this point, we're just checking the box before we
Sure. Yeah.
And so how do you get to people earlier? Because I think sometimes some small changes earlier on teaching, how to communicate, negotiate can just make a huge difference in resolving issues. So, and then my back. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're hoping for Guide Your Heart and why we went there. And then my background, boy, that's a little. So I have a PhD in clinical psychology and applied quantitative psychology, which is statistics. And so
I was crazy enough that I had to marry somebody to keep me in line.
Statistics, ill.
This is why the beard too.
Oh,
so
yeah.
then you can
Tell me about your mother.
In-law.
right.
Do you know the difference between in-laws and outlaws?
Oh, tell us.
Outlaws are wanted.
Oh,
I like that. Yeah, it's a kind of a bad dad joke, but I like it just the same.
Oh,
all the
boy.
way true.
Oh my gosh.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was my background, and I was doing work in health outcomes research, where we work a lot with real world data and just like how do you connect the right treatment and figure out what treatments work in the real world. And I was trying to take those concepts and go, boy, it'd be fun to apply these to marriage. I'd really like to do that. And so I'm thinking through that and going, this pays the bills, but it's not very fulfilling. So I then decided, after we went and saw Ron Deal before we got married, he drew out kind of the family genogram, or as we call it, the family map now. And we looked at that and the light bulbs just went on of going, oh, it's a blended family. This is about what we're about to step into. And so we saw all those things.
Yeah.
We're like, oh my goodness. I'm like, I bet we could digitize that. And so then a few years ago, I've got 3 kids who got degrees in computer science. The last one's about to get it. So different versions of computer science. So I had them help and we started programming it, and slowly we've been going around and around with different versions, and we've developed the Blending.love product. So it, you answer some questions. It draws up your family. It draws up your family map. We call it the family hedge because it goes sideways more than up and down. Draws in all the bonds, and it just highlights all those things that we looked at it and went, oh, that's why this is a struggle. My family isn't just the people who live in my house. So let me think from my kids' perspective. So the family map draws anybody who the kids would consider to be a parent or a sibling. And then that kind of brought.
Yeah. So
And don't you guys just love Ron Deal?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Love
Yeah,
Ron Deal.
Yep.
And
Every
for our
time I listen to
listeners,
him-
go ahead.
I say every time we listen to him, I'm like, I've heard him speak for literally, well, we went before we even engaged. So 17 years we've been following Ron, and I learn something new every time. I go,
he's good.
We just met him a couple of years ago and we absolutely adore him. We love him so much. But
Yeah.
I wanted to tell our listeners how we met them is actually, you guys went other episodes that you've listened to, you've heard us talk about Ron Deal, you've heard us promote his books, and we talked about a recap of a summit that we went to last year in Georgia. And this is how we met. Mike and Kristine was at one of the summits in Georgia.
Yeah. And one thing that Ron really pushes is the family map, right?
Yeah.
So he really pushes that. And so, you guys taking it digital really is really like, what?
Yeah.
Like, why didn't anybody think of this before? Like, it really is like, it's an obvious, like, wow, this really does fill an amazing gap. But, it's one of these things, like, tell somebody, how important it is, inform people how important it is before they get into a blended family about how important this is. Just, to your best ability, describe how really connecting what you guys have created can really serve them at a high level.
Yeah. And I think to keep in mind that the Blending.love was also designed both so a couple could do it in their own family, or anybody who just it walks with a blended family. And that could be, and I'm using that term because it could be anybody from a premarital educator to a pastor, to a therapist, to a coach, to a friend, to a small group leader, anybody who just wants to say to that couple, we see you, we see this complexity in your family, and we want to know you better. And so when it draws it out, you can see all these different bonds, and it really just says, oh, wow, like there's a red line always to, somebody, let's say, and every single person connected to that person has a red line. That's a stressful relationship.
The red line would mean a difficult
relationship,
relationship. It's where you're not getting along. Yeah.
Yep. Or, you look at it and you say, oh, wow, everybody. So like biologically, my boys and I have had, well, when you look at it when we were married, so 16 years ago, he's new to our family, right? My bonds to my boys were stronger than Mike's bonds to my boys, and vice versa. Mike's bonds to his girls. So you can see that biology is a very strong bond emotionally, right? And Ron talks about that too, right? So complexity in a family is going to breed stress, and stress thickens blood. And it just, you can see that on this blending map. And I love it. And I like to brag on my husband and our children because I just get to talk about it. I can my spiritual gift is breaking technology.
Yeah.
So I get to talk about it. But Ron actually liked it so much that it is in his new book. So Preparing to Blend is the first resource that he suggests people utilize to understand when you're preparing to blend your family. Now, obviously, it can be used at any point in your blended family journey, but it is a good way to open your eyes. And I actually have a pre-engaged couple that I just shared it with last week that said, sign us up for your premarital education because that's complex. And I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you're here before you decide and get the wedding invitations out and put that the last thing on your list. Let's talk about some of those things and make sure you're making a decision that's best for you and those kids that are involved. So
yeah, and I think the thing is that makes it so powerful, though, is you show Ron's book, and we'll make sure that everybody knows there's actually a code for a discount inside this book if you get this book. And I'll make sure that everybody gets their hands on that. But the thing is the best way to solve a problem is before the problem begins. And so premarital is so popular, but or not popular, but such a good point, but it's unpopular, right? People do, the statistics tell us, like, people do not want to do premarital education. They don't, because they already feel like I've already made the mistakes and then I got rid of the mistake and now I'm getting into something new and it's all going to be great. And that's just not the truth. And that's what I love about what you guys created, is that it really helps people have a realistic clarity of like, this is what's coming up. Yeah. And if we can start spearheading the things that we need to know now, your road of 7 years of blending struggle may come down to 3 or 4. Right. I don't know about you, but if you could have shaved 3 years of struggle off of my relationship, I would look 15 years old.
No, and Josh and I, like we said, we just met Ron Deal a couple of years ago, and I remember reading his book, Smart Step Families, and I called him and I was just like, if we would have had this, because we've been together for 11 years, I'm like, if we would have read this or known to do research, because you feel like you've already been married before, so you already know how to do it. Right? Yeah. So you just get married and you'll just make it work. Like, you parent kids, like, what's the difficulty in that? And
I'll never give him McDonald's.
And I'm like, we need to reach out to this guy and have him on our podcast, because he's right. He's not even in a blended family, and everything in his book is right. And we know, because we experienced all of it already, so it was just fun.
Yeah. So I love that you guys created something, though, that really, I don't know about, I mean, apparently you, because you guys agree, but most people, like, it's so much different if you can see it.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
If you can get a visual of it.
Yeah. And I like to say, my parents were together, and I wasn't really close to anybody who grew up in a blended family. And so then I was thinking, like, oh, this is just a first-time family again. I'm just going to call it first-time family, meaning like all the biological bonds, legal bonds are all within the house. They're all this nice, nice thing. Oh yeah, so we're just getting married. It'll be us in our happy house, and that'll be great. And that isn't really how it works, because for my kids, they live in 2 different houses. They have all these different parents. They're stuck in between, and they're kind of running through all of that. They have these divided loyalties, and even within the house, I'm like, when we first got married to her boys, like, I'm the guy sleeping with their mom. Like, that's not really a really good, warm relationship to be in,
Right.
And stepdad isn't dad. Like, they had a dad. So all relationships are different. I mean, sometimes dad's not in the picture, and you're really trying to bring somebody in. But yeah, and we're thinking, well, we're going to undo all the wrongs from before and come in and make this right and show them how a relationship works. And then we get in and we're like, oh my gosh, there's so many funky dynamics going on here. Yeah.
That was then guess what? And then the same 2 people that were involved with divorce. So, it's the complexity of it's still Kristine and still Mike. So if we didn't do the work on our own stuff, right. So now we also still have to figure out how to navigate relationship stuff, which is going back to the stuff that I do with Guide Your Heart, or we do. Mike's my number 1 volunteer, is the relationship education. It still goes down to effective communication, assertive communication, and reflective listening, conflict resolution, like, that stuff, it doesn't really change blended family or not. It just added some stressors, but we still had to figure out how to communicate with different personalities. Now we have these wounds, of relationships past. So now how do those play? So but Blending.love love the map that's created. I wish we would have had, honestly, for holidays, because at the very last map that shows it puts in fictitious grandparents, and your eyes just go, because there's so many people and lines, and each grandparent wants a subsection of the kids, not necessarily all of them, for holidays. And it's so stressful. And we just said, we're just taking back Christmas. We're doing it in the summer. And now our kids are old enough that they have significant others or fiancés, or they're getting married, and we're like, oh, this is even more complex. We're just calling it in a whole different month. But I wish I would have showed it to our mothers. Our fathers have both passed away, but we wish I would have had it for our mothers to say, this is what we're dealing with. So we're doing our best so everybody can see the kids, but there's a lot of people involved. A lot.
And we carry the burden of that as a blended family. We were the first blended family within my own family. Growing up, my mom had been divorced and remarried. And so, but I was really, really little. But as sibling wise, I had three sisters. I have three sisters and I have them. And I was the first really to have a blended family. And so the understanding of the complexities just wasn't there. Like, why aren't your kids here? Why aren't they here? Oh, they're always going to their mother's stuff first, always. And they're always full on Thanksgiving. And it's like, okay, make me feel worse about it. Like, I don't have a choice. Like, believe me, I'm picking battles here, and it's hard for me to even know that I was going to have to fight with my own mom about explaining about how difficult this is for us, and then something that I love that we learned at the summit that we went to, where we met you guys, that sticks out so well because it's unique to us, is that you guys created a neat thing within your software that actually shows how a non-biological daughter from either fits into the picture. So my oldest daughter is not biologically my daughter, and of course not Kristy's either, but she's still part of it. And that makes it, whoa, buddy, complex. Like, whoa, buddy, like all sorts of complex. And now that she's going to be having a baby, and it's still, so it doesn't get any easier, like you're saying, but it just gets more complex. So, I just appreciate knowing that I wish we knew before, but
here we are.
But here we are. Right. So we, just as a blended family, like appreciative of what you guys are pouring yourselves into,
Well, what I quote that Josh says all the time, and I love that he says it, is, when's the best time to plant a tree? 40 years ago or now? And that you have to apply that to blended families. Like, you should have done that before, but when's the second best time? Now. Like, you need to just start working on it now.
And knowledge is power. And that's what this gives you. It gives you knowledge, and which gives you an opportunity to make critical decisions, because like you said, Kristine, it's like communication. Yes, of course. But when you stack all the stress on top of communication, it's like, all right, now we need to.
You'd rather use hand gestures.
Right.
Many of those. So Blending.love. So I'll make sure to leave a link for everybody for that. And I'll let everybody know too, like, they can get their copy of Ron Deal's book. It's got a special code in there to give them a discount for this. But it's so important. I want our listeners and viewers to really understand this. It's not just for the blended family, right? It's for the practitioners, right? It's for the therapists. It's for the coaches. It's for the churches, which is very unutilized in the world, and I want to talk a little bit about that with you guys in just a second, but I want everybody to hear this. Like, this software is available as a tool to help blended families, even if you're not a blended family. And I think it's just really important that everybody hears and understands how important that is.
Marriage.
Marriage in general.
It's some ways, somebody I was talking to who, worked with blended families afterwards pointed out it's a really good assessment of a blended family. Like, if you go through and you look at it, you can see, oh, look, they have a struggle with an ex. Oh, they have an ex-spouse where they don't get along and they're going back and forth into courts, like they're fiery foes. Well, that's a big stressor on a blended family that, people might not know about, or you might not see right away. And, so if you're working with a couple, there's some stuff to address there. Like,
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. So, go ahead, Kristine.
No, I was going to say, and I think we'll talk about when we started our group at church, one of the things that we did is we had everybody handwrite one of these. So we had seen Ron do it. So we tried to do it. This is before Mike had the idea, and everybody, when they were drawing it out, we had them even go up to the grandparent level with actual names and stuff. But everybody forgot somebody. So we learned that was really interesting, because you don't necessarily in your family hedge. Like, here's what we also like to say, that somebody that's in the family hedge. So I'm just going to say those of you who are in blended families will be able to follow this because you'll know what I'm talking about. But my ex-husband's new wife, I mean, they've been married longer than we have, but his new wife, her ex-husband's parents, right? We don't know their names, but they impacted our house, right? Because a schedule got changed or information got shared or whatever that happens. So there's people that impact your life. So we don't, in Blending.love, you can kind of see where like this is pulling on the marriage. There's only one bond between Mike and I, this
Just
legal
the marriage,
bond, just
yep.
the marriage.
Yeah.
And
And all
everything
this
else
stuff
is
is
pulling
pulling
against
away.
us.
You can see all the things pulling.
Yeah. But our church, in seeing that, I wish we would have had that as a small group leader, because every time our group would get together, not every time, but for several times, I'd be like, okay, so this couple, how many kids do they have? And were they in court a lot? And if I, as a leader, would have pulled out and said, oh, here's them, here's this couple, here's this couple. Now I can know them, right? Which when you're known, how good does that feel when you walk in and you're like, hey, Mike and Kristine, like, they remember us. Or, oh, you remember my kids' names. Like, as a small group leader, I think it would have built trust and connection a lot faster. Just with that tool. So even the Blending.love tool in the map, there's an advisor page. So under that same tool, there is an advisor page which says if you're helping others navigate this, so as a group leader, a therapist, a pastor, a premarital educator, whatever that is, social worker, whatever, you can keep track of all the families that you're walking with in blended family stuff. So I could just pull that whole group at our church and say, okay, I'm going to print everybody's off. So when I walk in, I know who's there. Or if we're leading it, we try to get all this stuff even in, like we've done some community ed, locally, like it's not just through the churches, like anybody who works with families, we're trying to get in front of churches and schools and, community ed and social workers. And, it's powerful.
Yeah,
it
is.
We hope.
It is. Well, I think it is. And I think the one thing that blended families can all admit is we don't feel understood. And if you can have someone come into a small group or even a premarital session or your marriage session period, for a therapist, and they have this laid out and say, okay, I have an understanding now, that automatically makes me feel like, okay, there's a little bit of hope. Yeah. And there is, maybe this can work. Maybe there's something you're going to give me now that is going to give us some possibility that's, moving forward. So I love that. But I want to ask you guys just this. Okay. You guys have both been divorced. Here it comes. Correct? Right. I'm curious.
Ready.
Okay. You both been divorced, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And I know, Mike, you were living in a different state before you guys got married. So did you guys get married in Minnesota?
Oh, again, I love talking about blended families because nobody's heads are going to pop off. If you tell the story, this story.
We've told this story many times and people would look at you and they just kind of glaze over and go, what are you talking about? So, I lived in Indiana and Kristine lived here in Minnesota and she was friends with my sister who introduced us. And so Kristine, our first date, by the way, she drove down in a car with my sister and my mom for 9 hours before I had ever met her.
I heard how he saved some bunny or some bird or something.
Mom, you're not helping my case here.
It's true.
Anyway. So and then we figured out, after about a year or so, we were like, okay, we got to decide this is going to go or this is going to not, because this is just, it's kind of tricky. And so we figured out a way where I was able to telecommute for my job and I could work there and then go back and forth. And we were fortunate then I could go down for 10 days a month during the school year to spend time with my daughters. And so
we lived in two different states for 12 years of our marriage, which I did the math was 4.5 years of our marriage. We lived apart.
Wow.
So every month I would go down on a Friday and then spend the week and the following weekend with my daughters and then come back. And, so it would be 10 days in Indiana and 20 days in Rochester.
So we actually got married in Minnesota, but then we lived in two different states for 12 years of our marriage. Yeah.
So, okay. So, wow. Number one. Number two, the church that you guys got married in was the church that you were going to like before you got divorced the first time, Kristine?
Yeah. So that's another interesting thing. We got married in Mike's mom's backyard. Okay. By a pastor friend of his mom's. But then we attended the church that I was doing MOPS with, and that's where our blended family church was. But Mike had a church home in Indianapolis too. So yeah, we it's just the Stenslands.
So
It's blending of churches.
so
Well,
how
right.
did,
It is. And I had to lead divorce care without him because he'd be gone. I mean, that was just sort of the deal. Like we'll step up and volunteer, but you got to understand we're not always together. But Kristine's going to be local most of the time. Because my job wasn't always flexible and I had my own kids in a custody schedule to keep track of, right?
Yeah.
And jobs. And so sometimes I'd go down, but mostly it was Mike single parenting in Indianapolis, me sometimes single parenting here because or parenting alone. I wouldn't even call single parenting because single parent is a very different thing. At least I had a married, I could call my partner at my husband at 2:00 in the morning. And if I was frustrated with something, it was a single parent. That's a hard job for anybody who's listening. That's a single parent. That was a hard job. So I'm going to call it parenting alone. But it was, 4.5 years of our marriage. We lived in 2 different states.
Wow. So how did your church take
churches
take divorce and remarriage? Like, were they accepting of it? I mean,
I actually, interestingly enough, so when we did divorce care, I went through divorce care at the church here locally. So that was already started. And then when we raised our hands to volunteer, I think they were just happy to have a care ministry, somebody to volunteer to lead it. And then when we said, can we do the blended family stuff? Well, they already knew us because we'd showed up for 7 years every Tuesday night for 2 hours,
Although we had one of the pastors come in and talk to the divorce care, to just kind of talk through what the Bible says about divorce and go through that. And it was really fascinating. The first time he did it, the head pastor comes in and he's talking through this. And then people start asking questions.
Like the real questions.
It gives you the straightforward questions. And then they start to ask a question, what about this situation? And, and the situations are all over the place. And I don't know what you tell somebody is. And what was fascinating is then the next time he came in, he changed his presentation somewhat, and it was just it was more gracious, and he had
done more research.
He'd done more research and more work, and gone through and looked at it and really delved into the complexities of it. Because
and then the blending.
I always like to look at people and say, it takes 2 people to get married, but it only takes 1 to get divorced. One person leaves, and what do you do? You can't stop it.
We had somebody go through divorce care that never signed a piece of paper because they weren't joint on property and didn't have kids. And I didn't know this was a thing, but apparently it was. He never signed the divorce paper. She filed. There was some sort of time limit. Again, they weren't having to split anything, and he was divorced and never signed a piece of paper because he didn't want it. He didn't want it. And so the other part of our church that was cool is, we had a change. This isn't cool, the cool part, but there was a change of leadership several years ago, and the pastor doing premarital education was gone. And so they said, hey, Stenslands, we know that you love marriages. You've done divorce care. You started this blended family group. Would you take on premarital education? And we said, sure. And can we go out to lunch with you? And we drew out the family.
It was just before we created the blended family, before we created Blending.love, and we're sitting there asking the question, is there any need for this? Is there? I don't know. Well, let's go talk. Let's go
to
talk
our pastor.
He probably works with couples primarily. I wonder if he'd use this. So then we sit down, we draw it out
on a napkin, we're drawing it out.
We're kind of draw it out and show it, and the eyes just, he's like, you guys need to give a talk from the pulpit on this.
I was nope, I don't do sermons. Mm-mm.
So, and then
we did.
Yep. So then we did. We went up there and he interviewed us, and we drew it all up and we talked through it all. And just, I really wanted to give people really the message that, with divorce, it's not a do-over. It's a much more complicated thing because, when God said, what God has joined, let no man separate. I mean, if you have kids, you can't be separated. You're just connected through those biological bonds. They're never going away. And that's true. What the deal is.
And God hates divorce because it hurts his people. It's not, he doesn't hate divorced people.
No,
it's not the ideal. And we know why. We all know why. If you've been through that, it's a huge pain. I mean, it's a hurt, it's a wound, it's a scar.
Yeah. And then we want to start the blended families group. We call ourselves the blenders. Just because high risk group, because it's so complicated, and we don't want to see people get divorced again.
Right.
It's losses all over across the board. Oh, the kids have to go through all this again.
And that's
so-
where Josh and I talk about a lot about that we're so passionate about it because we don't want to see people get divorced again.
Right.
You know, and 70%, the divorce rate's higher with second
Yeah.
marriages with children when children are involved. And it is so hard on the kids. And they're already questioning everything. Like their mom and dad already split up. So
Yeah.
that's why it takes them so long to love their step parents. Because I mean, if you're going to leave my dad, you could leave him. And so I'm not going to trust it right away. It's very, very important. We don't want to see people get divorced ever, including nuclear families, you know?
You know, but the church doesn't always respond appropriately either. And that's why I love to ask this question, you know, how did your church respond to you? You know, a lot of times what ends up happening with people is that you get divorced. Well, I'm leaving. We have our best friends this happened to. He got divorced and he left the church he was part of, you know, because he was asked to. He's like, you know, you need to leave, you know? And so
because the wife kept the church.
Well, it should never have to be that way necessarily, right? It shouldn't be, you know, it should be an option. And he really didn't feel like it was an option. You know, it was a request, more of a suggested, like, you need to do this. And so I think it's just really important that people know that, God doesn't hate divorced people. He hates divorce because it's painful for us. And I just love how you said that because it's so true. And I want everyone that's on this, that's been through a divorce, that's in a blended family, that God doesn't hate you. God's not against you. You know, he's against the divorce itself. And
don't hate the sinner, hate the sin.
Yeah. And church is full of people. Even the pastor is a person and a human, you know, and sometimes they don't always respond well to the truth of what it is. So, you know, things like Blending.love give you an opportunity really to see things practically the way that it is. So you can stay in the marriage that you're in now because God cares about that.
Yeah.
And it's just so important that people know that.
Well, and I have noticed with a lot of the people that are super passionate about this perfectly blending and the blended families and stuff, their churches have been supportive of them for the most part and wanting it. We had Terry and Carol Moss on a month or two ago, you know, and their churches massively supported them trying to support blended families because they're in the church, whether pastors want to, or leadership in the church want to acknowledge it or not, their congregation is full of blended families and they need support. We need support. We're not hand raisers. It's a high need, low demand. But if it's offered and if it's talked about, we are willing because we do. Blended families want the help. They do. They want to know what they're doing.
They want guidance.
Yeah.
But they don't really raise their hands and ask for it. It's really fascinating. If we get together with blended families and start talking about things, suddenly, and then we're talking and we're getting close and all this stuff is coming out and everybody's relating. And we're like, we found our people, but other spots. Because you understand, like you live in two different states and you're going back and forth. And my goodness, that must be difficult. And don't you miss and how do you, because you have this choice, like, well, I love my kids. How do I do this?
Yeah. But I think sometimes, we called it the scarlet letter D, right? So scarlet letter D, divorce on our forehead. And I think because of my personality in particular, I was like, whatever, I'm going to keep going. My ex and I didn't go to that church. We hadn't been in this community very long when we moved here and then got divorced pretty quickly afterwards. So we weren't established at the church, but I think a lot of people just want to just sneak in with our 4 kids and just, nobody knows any the better because they look enough like us that we're, could just be an intact family. And whereas you said, there's 40% of the people, maybe or more, sitting in congregations. Well, an interesting thing that we had happen is, again, my number one volunteer, one of the things Guide Your Heart has done locally is almost doubled the number of premarital educators utilizing a tool called Prepare Enrich. So it's an assessment to help couples, and we use that with our couples. And so we trained another handful of people here in Rochester, Minnesota, to do it. And one of the pastors himself was like, wait a minute. And we shared blending because we supplement a lot of different things of that curriculum, which is cool because it's super flexible. But we were sharing blending and he goes, wait a minute, he has a non-biological kid, but even it's through the foster adopt stuff. And he was like, so pastors from other churches, because we were training up more other pastors and community leaders. So it wasn't just pastors that were now can use Prepare Enrich, but he even recognized it in his own family. And so, I think as people recognize like, wow, like anybody who's not biologically related to me living in my home, there might be this is a little bit different than just all of us, like
They might feel like a little bit of an
There's an
outsider.
outsider.
There might just be, And,
yeah.
and it just works out that way. And to acknowledge that and to see that and, to be able to love everybody, just to recognize that and still love everybody. Like it's there. To pretend it's not there, sometimes it just makes it worse, right?
And I think the biggest thing I learned from Ron when we went to his Smart Step Family weekend before we were even engaged again, because I married a researcher, so he wanted to know what he was getting into. I had already told my girlfriends.
There might have been a vacation to Colorado.
Oh yeah, because I like fun. That was true.
Yeah.
So we could go to Colorado, have fun, and he could get on board and know we were getting married. But when he told us about the biological bonds being the strongest, it gave me permission to love my kids differently, right? Like I love my boys more and I love my girls. But I think, especially as women who are relational, it feels weird to say that. But if push comes to shove, I side, my boys are mini me's. Like I can't help it. And
they share her shenanigans.
They share my shenanigans. The shenanigans of his kids he tolerates different than my kids' shenanigans. And so I think just knowing that and accepting it, but that doesn't mean I don't love my girls. I do. Right. I love them deeply and I'm very blessed to have them in my life. It's a different thing. My boys were a part of me. And I think that gave me the permission to say, all right, I don't have to walk around feeling guilty that I have this different level of love or different. Right. I don't know. I'm not even say level, but it's different and that's okay.
It is different.
It just is, it just is. And so I think
that's okay.
And I try to tell people walking into blended families, just give yourself permission to accept that. We've met hundreds of blended families. And I have yet to anybody say that's not true.
Yeah.
I haven't. I have never, I mean, maybe it exists. I don't know, but I haven't.
It's funny because, when you talk to people that don't have blended families and you start saying things like, it's just different, and they're like, no, it's not different.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, I'm not trying to be mean. Like, it's not like it's a mean thing, like, oh, everyone's equal and everything. Well, I would love for it to be, it's just, that's not real.
Yeah.
Right. It's just not the reality of it. And I think when you first get into a blended family, you want it all equal. Like your heart desire is for this all to be fun and awesome and everyone's happy. And it's like, but man, that's wrong. Like, it is just not that way. And that's a struggle internal as a parent.
Well, and it's powerful though. Like a lot of people that have talked to me, like I've said my stepkids and they're like, oh, you should not call them that, and I'm like, why? I'm like, it's never been a bad thing in our family ever. Like it's not a taboo thing.
Yep.
And so it's really powerful in a blended family when you can be honest with the position and the feelings with everything that's going on and you make it a good thing, not a bad thing. Like this is all okay. It empowers people to share their feelings and to be okay with them, deal with them, work through them. Yeah. And so I think it's really powerful to have things like this for blended families to see on a chart, like actually see, to open up their eyes. Some parents don't. I didn't realize until I read, I know I'm going all over the place. I didn't realize until I read Ron Deal's book and I'm like, oh my gosh, I failed now. It's just too late. That my oldest son, so his daughter remained the oldest and remained the only girl still. Yeah. His daughter and his son have another brother from his ex-wife that has a different dad. So his son remained the oldest boy in our house, but was familiar having a younger brother. And my youngest boy remained the youngest boy, but my oldest boy became the second oldest boy in our house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't even fathom that until I read Ron Deal's book, and we had already been together for 8-9 years, and I'm like, I failed. It's too late. He's traumatized. He's ruined. Like we didn't deal with it.
We broke him.
Yeah. He's broken. Yeah.
I tell my kids that all the time. I say, listen, if I screwed you up, there are people out there that can help you and it'll just keep the economy going. So I'm just doing my part to keep the world moving. And they're old enough now that we joke, but
yeah,
I get it. I mean, there's a lot of displacement, and unless you live it, you don't think about that. Like birth, like you said, birth order.
It changes,
and it changes by house, right?
Yep.
So like, sort of like my son was the oldest at his dad's house, remained the oldest at his dad's house, but was second oldest here. Oh. And his daughter was youngest at her mom's or his ex-wife's house or mom's house, but second, not the youngest at my house because I had one younger, right? So
Yeah.
and it was very interesting. I'm sure maybe you guys experienced this too, but how fast sibling rivalry happens when you blend a family. Like, yes, our kids were young and that didn't take long for that to start,
Couple weeks. Yeah, weeks into it.
I was laughing going, wow, this didn't take very long.
Yeah.
One of our favorite
quotes.
step parent quotes here is when we first got married, Connor, her youngest, he was probably 5 at the time, and he was hanging out. We're up at a cabin, and he was with my niece, was right about the same age.
So the sister that introduced us, her daughter.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're hanging out, and the 5-year-old niece, she looks over to Connor and she says, "Do you like your dad?" And he looks back at her and he says, "Who do you mean, my real dad or my fake dad?" And I thought, that's funny. I kind of like that. It feels kind of fake dad to me too, because like dad's there.
Dad's
I'm
in the
not sure what
picture.
my role is.
Yeah.
I'm coming in. I'm mom's husband. It's not quite dad. And
Yeah.
then I had a good conversation with Jared after he was 18, her oldest, and we tried to define the step parent thing. And we came up with, it's a mentorship role. It really is kind of a mentor role, or at least that's what it was for us.
Yeah.
And it grows and gets stronger over time, and very rewarding now.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Christy's really bonded with my son the last few years immensely, like on a whole new level, and you just never know. You just never know how it's going to work, and it's really incredible as things do get along where some of the I don't know, the high level stressors are not as high level anymore, not that you don't have any others, but it's, you now though you get to see some really deep rooted bonding happen. And it's like, they're cool with their positions,
Yeah.
He knows that Kristy's not his mom and they're cool with that, And like you said, Mike, it's like a mentorship at the highest level, and it's like an appreciation now comes about, about all this hard work that both of them put in, along the way. So it's
I put in the most.
It's of course she's the queen. So.
Yes. Well, there you go. As she should be.
Yeah. So as we wrap up today, if you could give one single piece of advice to a newly blended or pre-blended family that you believe could be the most impactful piece of advice you could give them, go ahead and give that, and then tell us why that is the advice you're giving, please.
And maybe they each have
You
something
with the
different.
beard.
Oh, you're
Come
going to look
on,
at me.
do
I'll
the
rub
beard,
the
do the
beard
beard.
and be tell me about your
Like,
mother.
or
No,
we should
it won't
do,
be that.
you know
It'll
what?
be
What's what did on late night TV when he had the question? Why can't they
Johnny Carson. He's pulling the thing up there.
Probably nobody's
Oh,
as
you're
old as
going
we
back
are.
a few
I
years there,
I want
Kristine.
the envelope that says
There
the
we go.
answer is
Okay.
Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to answer because you asked 2 questions there. Actually, what would I tell people pre-marriage or the early? And I think pre-marriage, what I would tell them is if you look and there's a difficult relationship with an ex-spouse, think twice. That's going to make your life very, very difficult. Like that's back and forth in court. There's not really much you
very
can
aware
do.
that that's what it's going to be.
Just know it's coming and try to figure out how in the world to manage that.
That's good.
Amen.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's emotionally taxing when you have that, and it's financially taxing.
And
it's hard on it was hard on our marriage.
And if somebody doesn't want to get along with you,
Yep.
they're not going to get along
Right.
with you. Like you just got to accept
Doesn't
that.
matter what you do.
True.
Yeah.
What about into marriage? Maybe you're already married.
No, you're going to do it. It takes time. I think that would be the big one. I would say it takes time. Be aware of what your role is. Our kids have a perspective in the blended family that we don't get. I think it's one of the things I would share. I asked my daughter who's helping me program the app now about it. She made this comment not so long ago. When you guys were getting married, it was kind of hard because I was happy for you, but not so happy for me. And that was a weird place to be, and I think about it and go, oh, you were 6 or 8 and, kind of feeling that. I'm like, oh, that makes complete sense. I'm happy for my mom. I'm happy for my dad that got remarried, but I kind of want them back together. I don't know that I want this and I didn't choose it. And
So I would agree. Just being slow and
think about the kids' position. Yeah.
And when people say don't put the kids in the middle, they already are. So that's another thing you just kind of accept. Don't make it more more
Yeah.
stressful with them in the middle. So we've used the term a lot. We're dropping the rope. We're dropping the rope. We'll see you when we can see you. Like, we're here for you. We love you.
I see you stuck
Sit
between your
with
mom and
yeah.
I, and you're getting tugged on both sides. I'm just,
Dropping
hear me?
the
I'm
rope.
putting the rope down, just putting it down right here.
And that
I'm not pulling. I love you. I want to see you, but I recognize that you're stuck in the middle
right.
there.
And that
Yeah.
hasn't ended. I mean, we have adult children now, and on the one side, I mean, we have different. I co-parent with my ex very differently than Mike's. We get along really well and co-parent really well.
So
And
you
it
see
was
both
pretty
sides of that.
contentious on the other side. So it's hard. It's gotten way better. Now the girls are older, but it's still hard to navigate. And those kids
Yeah.
are still your kids. Doesn't matter how old they are. So, that's what we'd tell people.
Yeah.
Good. Well,
All great.
I can tell you we feel the same, and we understand. We're there as well. And so we're not going to wish a grandbaby anytime soon to you, because we're about ready to experience that. So I'm sure that's a whole new map all on its
Yes.
own.
Oh, it'll grow down
Go
there.
down, yeah.
Little
You
Adam.
get to add. Yeah. There will be or is an edit function. I don't even know.
There is an
I
edit
can't talk
function.
about
There's an
it.
edit function, but you can't add a person with it yet.
Not yet.
All
Remember,
right.
we're just-
All right. Well, I like not yet. I always like not yet.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
always
far,
means
it's
maybe.
Mike-
So we like maybes.
Right. Mike
All
and
right.
the
So
kids.
do our listeners and viewers a favor. Please tell them how they can get a hold of you, how they can come check out what you got going on.
Yeah.
This is exciting stuff. So please tell them.
Sure. So you can go to blending.love. So it's not anything other than blending.love.
That's the URL. Yeah. So like www.google.com. It's just blending.love.
Yep.
Okay.
And so you'll see on there, if you're an advisor or if you're a couple, that you can take that map. And there's also a contact us button on there. So if you have questions, you can certainly get a hold of us. Or if you want to email me directly, again, extrovert, introvert. So I will answer and Mike will let it sit there. So
Yeah.
Kristine at blending.love is my email, and I answer usually pretty quickly. Now I say that and watch, I won't, but I try to get back to people just because we want this app to be utilized and to be useful. I mean, quite frankly,
We wanted to bless people.
Bless people
Yeah.
and just help your families. So want to make sure that we're answering your questions quickly or getting what you need quickly. So
Yeah. And you guys have a lot of stuff coming up personally, right?
we do graduations and weddings. We have 8 weddings that we're going to this year. Only one of our children, but we've done a lot of premarital education. It's just that crazy season, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. And we're walking with a bunch of couples to get them ready for their marriages. So it's all good stuff. And then a couple conferences that we'll be at, sharing blending.love. So good stuff.
Yeah.
I love that. So thank you so much for sharing your time.
You bet.
And we look forward to connecting at some time in the future.
Yeah. Thank you so
Sounds
much.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
you
great to
bet.
talk to you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us on.
And congrats early on that grandbaby. That's
Oh yeah,
exciting.
that sounds really fun to me.
I
I'm
know.
looking, when the time comes, I'm looking forward to that.
Right. Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
All right.
All right,
See
thank you.
ya.
So I want to thank you so much for being here. We really hope you found some serious value in this interview today. Mike and Kristine Stensland are just amazing people. Blending.love will make sure to get you all the information down inside the chat so you can get there and contact them. Plus, the email, if you want to contact them directly, is Kristine at blending.love. We'll make sure to leave you a link on that. Anything else before we shut it down today, my love?
No, I just love them. So I thought it was awesome that they agreed to be on our show and share a little bit about their life and where they feel God is leading them, and share about the transition that has been happening in their own lives, where it started and where they're going. And it's good to see people's passion for blended families. It's so awesome once people that are in this space, how they are like, yeah, and blended families don't raise their hand. They don't ask for help. But then once you get them in and you all start talking, and then they're like, yes. And it's just great to have more, extension of our community for that.
Yeah, we really want to ask you too, if you've made it this far and you've watched this episode and, please share this episode with somebody that you know that needs it. Maybe you have a pastor friend that needs to understand blending.love. Maybe you have, a therapist or a counselor or even friends that are blending themselves or in blending. This is really a powerful tool. We want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity, gets this in their hands. So we want to thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday at 7.
Bye.